Hello everybody and welcome to the Leading Edge Detailing Online Training Academy. In this tutorial we're going to be talking about paint contaminants and paint decontamination. But before we get stuck into the tutorial, I just want you to know that I actually tried shooting this tutorial, and I did shoot it about 4 times. And every single time I recorded this video and I looked at it, I felt to myself it wasn't really getting the right message and the right value that I wanted you guys to get out of this subscription. And the reason is there are a lot of videos online talking about how to use a clay bar, how to use tire remover, how to use iron remover. There is no shortage of decontamination videos. But what I did find is lacking online is a video talking about the contaminants themselves, why we need to remove them, how they form, and how to remove them. And I wanted to give you this knowledge so that way when you inspect the car and you're detailing it, you know exactly what to do and what not to do. So for me, let's talk about the technical aspects of contamination and how to remove that contamination. Before we look at every single type of contaminant though, I do want to break down the decontamination process into 2 main areas: chemical decontamination and mechanical decontamination. And what that basically means is when we talk about chemical decontamination, we're looking at removing that contaminant using a chemical. We're trying to melt it or dissolve it or loosen it without physical abrasion and physical contact as such with the car. With mechanical decontamination, we're primarily talking about clay. We're talking about clay towels, clay bars, clay mitts, anything where you're using physical abrasion and physical contact to physically remove that contaminant. And the reason why this is important to understand is depending on the kind of car you're working on, you might not be in a position to use a mechanical decontaminant, and vice versa. You might need to consider mechanical decontamination if a chemical is not working. But it's important to look at both, because whilst they do both work sometimes on some types of contaminants, sometimes you'll need to pick one over the other. And again, as I mentioned, if you're decontaminating a car that's been detailed and ceramic coated, you don't want to go and clay bar it and scratch it. So keep that in mind as we go through the list of the different contaminants. First up on the list of contaminants is iron fallout. And iron fallout, or rail rust some people call it, is quite literally metal particles floating around in the atmosphere that have landed onto the paintwork of the vehicle and have started to rust. And they look like little yellow dots, quite easily seen on most white cars, especially on the rear, on the deck of the boot lid, or the rear on the deck of the bumper. And it's simply because the way the car drives and the air moves around it, it creates a vortex on the rear of the car, and dirt and grime tends to sit in that area. So you'll see that as little tiny yellow dots, and they will not wash off. And you might think to yourself, oh my God, the paint is stuffed. But it's quite easy to remove iron fallout. With iron fallout, you can address this contaminant in both chemical and mechanical decontamination. If the iron fallout is not too bad, or if you're decontaminating as a precautionary measure, generally speaking, before you start seeing little yellow dots, you can use an iron fallout remover like iGel Iron. And it's quite simple. Wash the car while it's still wet before you dry it. Spray the iron remover on there. It will start turning purple and you'll start seeing little runs of purple, and that's the iron being dissolved. The good thing about this is you're not adding any abrasion, you're not risking scratches, you're not risking swirl marks. However, as you can imagine, if you're waiting for something to dissolve iron, it's going to be done very slowly. So iron fallout removal chemically is more suited than not for a maintenance procedure. So possibly, every 3 months to 6 months, you use an iron fallout remover like iGel Iron on your car to keep the iron fallout shavings, at bay proactively rather than reactively. However, in most cases, if you're dealing with a used vehicle or a car that has heavy contamination, you will need to use a medium to heavy clay bar and lubricate it quite well. It should remove the iron fallout quite easily. So very, very common. You will most likely come across this quite often. The next type of contaminant is just general dirt and grime that has adhered to the paint. You will physically maybe not see this, but as you wash the car, especially if you're wearing some nitrile gloves, if you run your hand across the surface of the paint, it will sound gritty, it will sound not smooth. And that is generally speaking just dirt and grime that's adhered onto the surface of the paint over years and years. So with general dirt and grime buildup over time, there are two ways again to address this issue. You can use a product like IGL F4, which is a chemical paint cleaner, and that will more than likely than not dissolve the contaminants that are on the paint and give it a little bit more gloss. But I would personally be choosing the IGL clay towel because it's going to be very fast to use, very cheap to use in the long term, and more often than not fairly safe on the paint. And you can just go and do the whole car in probably 10 minutes. If you use the clay towel and you're still finding that the paint is feeling a little bit rough, that's when you have to then step it up to a medium clay bar or a more aggressive clay bar. Another common type of paint contamination is tree sap. With tree sap, it actually breaks down into kind of two aspects of dealing with that sap. The first aspect is the physical droplet of the sap. And if it is fairly fresh, it's going to feel like a sticky, honey-like substance. If it's been left there for a very long time, it's going to be a very hard crystal-like substance. And to deal with tree sap, we first have to address the physical buildup first. We want to make sure that we remove that chemically to begin with. You want to loosen that tree sap or dissolve it first using a product like IGL tar. And what that's going to do is remove the risk of the crystal falling off the paint, getting stuck into your clay towel or clay bar, and then scratching the rest of the paint. Once you have removed that physical droplet of tree sap, again, whether it was fresh and honey-like or old and crystallized like a rock, you need to remove that first chemically. That then may leave a stain beneath it. And then you may possibly be able to remove that stain using the clay bar. And that's before we move on to the paint correction, and then you'll have to remove that stain using abrasion like a cutting compound, or hopefully not, but maybe wet sanding. So that is a kind of contamination you ideally want to do both things. Chemical followed by mechanical if there is a stain after you chemically remove the tree sap. Road tire is another common type of defect, but it's quite easily fixed. You ideally want to remove that to begin with using a chemical process, like using IGL tar or even a product like CarPro Tirex. But keep in mind, those spray-on dissolve type products can damage vinyl, can stain plastic, and can sometimes stain paint. So always read the bottle and the manufacturer's instructions. But with tar, it is faster and easier to use a chemical process to remove it. If you still find that there is a black spot that you kind of don't feel with your finger on the paint, you can quite easily remove that with a clay bar or a clay towel. Bug splatter is an interesting one because there are many ways to resolve this, and I normally like to go from least aggressive to most aggressive. So if you're dealing with a car that has a lot of bug splatter on there, I would personally, if it's not ceramic coated, spray the car with IGL Multi or put a little bit of IGL Multi with IGL Blizzard and snow foam the car that way. Let it dwell for a little bit and then pressure wash off. That normally knocks off all the bug splatter for me. Super fast, super safe to do. But if you are not in a position to do that, you can then use a bug and tar remover like IGL tar, or again like a product like Tirex. And finally, if failing that method, you can always follow up with the clay towel. Keep in mind though that if you're going to be pressure washing bug splatter off, keep your distance from the paint because you don't want to accidentally rip the paint off if there is a stone chip where the bug splatter is. So always approach it with some common sense. Paint overspray. You're probably sitting down saying, what do you mean paint overspray? It is very common. I don't know about other parts of the world, but in Australia, tradies are lazy and they like to paint stuff on the side of the road and not tell people to move their cars. Very, very, very common. And as you can see in the photo here, in an excessive case, that was not paint overspray. Somebody had paint poured on their car and unfortunately that was not repairable. That car was written off. It was brought to my shop physically, that one. I saw that with my own eyes. However, not to digress, paint overspray happens very frequently, especially if a vehicle was taken for repairs in a body shop and that body shop was painting other cars and they did not cover up the cars that are being stored around it. Very common. You'll feel it as a little bit of roughness on the paintwork when you're washing the car, even on the glass. And to deal with paint overspray, you will need to use a clay bar. Unfortunately, the clay towel sometimes is not strong enough. You will either need to use a medium or an aggressive clay bar to remove paint overspray. Do not follow the instructions of the internet and start using things like thinners. Thinners and paint strippers are designed to remove paint. Yes, your overspray that you're dealing with is paint, but you'll also risk damaging the paint on the car that is supposed to be there. So always clay bar. Never go down the path of using thinners. It may or may not work, but the risk is not justified, if that makes sense. Mineral deposits and calcium buildup, very common in parking lots and apartment buildings. Your car is parked underground. It rains, the rain falls through the cracks of the concrete, goes onto your car, and it leaves blotches of calcium buildup. Very easy and straightforward to deal with. Use IGL Delete. It's the fastest and best method to deal with mineral buildup, I guess, if you want to word it in that way. So simply follow the instructions of IGL Delete, apply it onto a microfiber cloth, let the IGL Delete dissolve the calcium buildup, and then follow up maybe with a light machine polish if there's any staining left behind. Do not use IGL Delete on laminated glass, especially windscreens. If you feel the need to use it on glass, use IGL Glass Plus. It's a much safer option. In a similar aspect, concrete splatter. Now that you will need to deal with using IGL Delete again. For both the concrete splatter and mineral deposits, I do not recommend using mechanical decontamination because all those minerals or salts can go into your clay towel or clay bar and scratch the rest of the paint, especially concrete, right? You don't want actual sand particles in a clay bar. So if you're dealing with concrete, apply gently some IGL Delete, let that break the concrete down, and then pressure wash off gently and carefully to not damage any paintwork. So IGL Delete, fantastic for these kinds of things. Finally on the list, we have embedded dirt and even fungus. And you're going to find that in a lot of 4x4s where the roofs are fairly high and they rarely get washed. And it just looks like black buildup. For that, you'll need to take a multi-step approach. So first you need to try to loosen that contamination using IGL Multi, IGL Tar, or chemically try to dissolve as much of it as you can. And then you will need to follow up with some sort of clay. Start off with the clay towel. If that works, keep going. If it doesn't work, go to a medium clay bar. And if that doesn't work, go to a more aggressive clay bar. It is removable 100%. You just have to follow the process from least aggressive to most aggressive. But in this space, the most important thing to remember is to loosen it first chemically before approaching it mechanically. It will make your job faster and it will make your job cleaner. It will make your job easier. So this is the list of most common types of paint contamination and how to address them and why. The most important thing to remember in all of this is if you're using mechanical decontamination, whatever you're working on, you need to make sure it doesn't fall off the paint, get stuck into your clay, and then scratch the paint. On the other side of the chemical decontamination, you need to make sure that whatever you're using is also going to be safe for the paint or the plastic or the glass you're working on. There is no point of removing a contaminant of the paintwork but damaging the paintwork in the process. That is not what us detailers do for a living. Our job is to fix without creating more damage rather than to fix something and break something else in the process. So thank you for watching. Please feel free to download the cheat sheet and use it and reference to it. You will find your own preference in terms of products you'd like to use in the long term, but I do strongly recommend having IGL Delete, IGL Glass Plus, IGL Tar, IGL Glue Off is a great one as well, a product like CarPro Tarex, and then having IGL Clay Towel, a medium clay bar. I personally like Clay Magic Blue, and finally an aggressive clay bar like Clay Magic Red. If you have that selection of tools, you will probably be able to resolve any kind of contaminant you come across. Thank you for watching.